Hello, my sweet stitchers! So happy you're here! In this video, we'll be making the doll's legs in one continuous piece. We'll be using light green and white yarn, along with our crochet hook, a stitch marker or a scrap piece of yarn, scissors, and a yarn needle. Let's get started! Here's what the leg looks like once it's attached to the doll. Both legs are made exactly the same way. We'll only be using the light green and white yarn for this part. Start with the light green yarn and chain 10. Working into the second chain from the hook, make an increase by working 2 single crochets into the same chain. For this round, we'll work into the top loops of the foundation chain only, because we'll be using the remaining loops later on. Next, work 7 single crochets, 1 in each of the next 7 chains. In the last chain, work 3 single crochets into the same chain. Now rotate your work. We'll continue along the other side of the foundation chain, working into the loops we left unworked earlier. Let's take a closer look at where to begin, since this part can be a little confusing. If you gently pull on the starting yarn tail, you'll be able to identify the chain where those 3 single crochets were made. It's this one. We won't work into that chain again. Instead, start in the very next one. Then continue working into each of the remaining chains. Here, here, until you've made all 7 single crochets. You'll have a total of 20 stitches. This loop here counts as a stitch. It's the loop that was already on your hook before you started working into the foundation chain. That's the stitch where we'll begin round 2. From this point on, we'll be working in continuous rounds. Work an increase into this loop, then 1 single crochet, then another increase, and then 7 single crochets. Repeat the same sequence on the other side. 1 increase, 1 single crochet, 1 increase, and then 7 single crochets. If you're using a stitch marker, place it in the first stitch of the increase. Continue working until you complete the round as described. Don't worry about the gaps in the center of the piece. They'll close up on their own as you continue working. At this point, you should have an oval-shaped piece with a total of 24 stitches around. Now work 2 rounds of single crochet, with 24 single crochets in each round. At this point, the toe of the sock is complete. We'll now switch to the white yarn. I'll be using an invisible color change, but feel free to use whichever method you prefer. I'll show you the one I use. First, I'll make an invisible finish to eliminate the jog at the end of the last round. Cut the yarn, leaving a fairly long tail, and pull it up through the loop to fasten off. Thread the yarn tail onto a yarn needle. I use this technique to even out the edge. It's especially useful when changing colors or whenever I need to leave a piece open with a neat, even edge. This is the last stitch we worked. Skip the next stitch, then insert the needle from front to back under both loops of the following stitch. Pull the yarn through to the front. Then, in the last stitch we worked, insert the needle from front to back through the back loop only. This creates a new stitch that replaces the one we skipped. Adjust the yarn, then gently loosen and shape the new stitch until it's the same size as the rest. As you can see, the job disappears. Make a small stitch through one of the strands on the inside. Then tie a knot around that same strand to secure the invisible finish. Now we have a nice, even edge. We'll now work with the white yarn around this edge, starting in any stitch. Work 5 rounds of single crochet with 24 single crochets in each round. I don't recommend starting in the stitch we just created, since working a few single crochets across it will help smooth out the jog even more. I won't be using any additional color change techniques because it actually looks just fine if we continue working normally. When I join the new color with a slip knot already on my hook to make the first single crochet, I'll come to the starting knot on the next round. To keep it looking neat, I work that first single crochet a little differently. For that stitch only, insert your hook through the front loop only. Then continue working the rest of the round as usual. Once you've finished, shape the piece to even out the stitches a little, especially the ones along the sides. To continue, we need to be positioned at one of the side stitches of the piece, so work as many single crochets as needed until you reach one of them. In my case, I need to work up to this point. From this point on, we won't be working in continuous rounds anymore. We'll now begin working back and forth across the 12 stitches at the front, turning the work to begin each row. Work 2 rows of 12 single crochets. We won't chain 1 to begin each row because we need a tight edge along the sides. So, after turning the work, insert your hook into the first stitch or opening you come to, make the first single crochet there, and begin the row. Do the same when you turn the work for the next row. not know which is the last stitch, but you can always find it lying along the edge of the work, just above the knot at the end. Right here. You can see the V of the stitch with its 2 loops, and that's where we'll insert the hook. Chain 1 to secure the work so it doesn't come undone. Then tighten that chain well. This chain is not a stitch. It's simply there to secure the work. The stitch is the one right next to it. Continue working with the light green yarn. Again, work 2 rows of 12 single crochets, working back and forth. Since we've finished here, turn the work and work back across those stitches. 12 and then 12. Here's the chain, so insert your hook into the stitch right next to it. All of these beginning and ending yarn tails will later remain inside the piece, so they won't be visible. Continue working with the light green yarn, back and forth, making decreases in the center, following this pattern. When it's time to make the decreases, pick up 1 loop from each stitch and complete the single crochet by pulling through all the loops together. This creates a dense stitch that won't open up when we stuff the piece, since this will become the heel. But feel free to use whichever method you prefer. Once you've finished, chain 1 to secure the work. Pull it tight and cut the yarn. Continue working with the white yarn across the 12 white stitches that were left unworked. The foot is now complete, and we'll begin making the leg. Work 12 single crochets across the 12 stitches we have here. 2 single crochets in the white section, 12 single crochets across the green section, and 2 single crochets in the next white section. This will give us a new round of 28 stitches. Let's see how to do it. First, find the first available white stitch. This one has already been worked, so the next one is the first free stitch. Begin here and work the 12 single crochets. From this point, you should have 12 stitches to work into. If you don't, make an increase at the end if you're only missing 1 stitch. It won't affect the piece at all. Now work 2 single crochets in this small white section. You may have a gap here, but don't worry, because it will close up as we continue working. Work the single crochets through any loop or opening you can see, inserting your hook wherever it can pass through. Now work 12 single crochets across this green section. To make it easier to keep track, count 6 single crochets to the halfway point, and then 6 more single crochets across the remaining stitches. As you can see, we have 4 stitches here. This is the chain. When we reach this section, we'll work 2 decreases. So if I need to work 6 stitches from the halfway point to here, and this decrease already counts as 1 single crochet, I'll work 5 single crochets along this side. This decrease also counts as 1 single crochet, so I'll work the other 5 single crochets along the other side. As always, we'll make the decreases by working through the front loops only. So we'll work 5 single crochets and 1 decrease, then 1 decrease and 5 single crochets. Insert your hook through whichever loops are available, but make sure there isn't a gap left under your hook. If that happens, look for another place to insert your hook. Now work the 2 single crochets in the other white section. If, while working this section, you notice any gaps, like this one, or this one, don't insert your hook through them, because that will only make the gap larger. Instead, work the single crochet below the gap, or into the next available loop so you skip over it. We now have the new round of 28 stitches. I'm going to trim these yarn tails. You can do this earlier if they get in your way while working the previous single crochets. Now work 28 single crochets around these 28 stitches. There's one important thing to keep in mind. When the distance between my hook and the next stitch I need to work is too large, like in this case, working into it will leave a hole in the middle. Whenever this happens, when I don't have one stitch immediately after another, but instead I have 2 edges to join, I'll use what I call the loop technique, where we fill the gap with extra loops. I'll pick up loops from the strands along the way. I'll pick up 1 loop from the center, 1 loop from the first stitch I need to work, and then pull through all the loops together. This is the first single crochet of the 28 stitches I need to make. This way, I force the work to come together and fill the gap with those extra loops. Work 1 more round of 28 single crochets. Now we'll continue working with the light green yarn, always in continuous rounds, to make each of the stripes on the sock. I'll be using the invisible finish technique to end one color and begin the next. You can start each new color in any stitch. It doesn't matter. For the rest of the leg, and for the green and white stripes, follow this pattern. remember that it's important to stuff pieces like the arms and legs as you work. Don't overstuff the foot. Add just enough stuffing to give it shape and make it firm. For the first leg, make an invisible finish around the edge, just as we did before. This will make it easier to work with later. Don't make an invisible finish on the second leg, because from this point on, we'll begin making the body. But we'll see that in the next video. All right, my sweet stitchers, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!